She told me if I didn't like it, I could leave, so I did exactly that. Sometimes people say things they don't mean, but Rachel meant every word that came out of her mouth that night. I'd been watching my girlfriend of 3 years apply mascara for another ladies' night at downtown Memphis clubs, trying to find the right moment to bring up what had been eating at me for months. Our relationship felt like it was running on autopilot, and I needed to know where we stood, especially since I'd been working overtime on a major intersection redesign project that would determine my next promotion at the Municipal Traffic Systems Office. When I finally gathered the courage to suggest we needed to discuss our future together, she snapped at me without even looking away from her mirror, treating my feelings like an inconvenience to her social calendar. Rachel had been increasingly distant for months, spending every weekend partying with coworkers from her medical billing company while I pulled long hours trying to solve traffic flow problems that actually mattered to our city's infrastructure. Her dismissive attitude that night, combined with months of feeling like a roommate rather than a partner, finally pushed me past my breaking point. I realized I'd been making excuses for someone who saw our relationship as optional entertainment rather than something worth protecting. The pattern had become predictable and exhausting. Rachel would spend Friday afternoons getting ready for nights out that stretched until 3 in the morning, then sleep until noon on Saturday before starting the cycle again. I tried suggesting we do things together on weekends, maybe visit the farmer's market or check out that new hiking trail everyone talked about, but she always had plans with her coworkers that apparently didn't include boring boyfriends who worked for the city. Meanwhile, I was genuinely excited about my intersection project, redesigning traffic patterns around the medical district that could reduce emergency vehicle response times by up to 15%. When I tried sharing details about the potential impact on patient outcomes, Rachel would nod politely while scrolling through Instagram, clearly more interested in her coworkers' club photos than anything I accomplished during 60-hour work weeks. That night, watching her apply false eyelashes with the same precision she reserved for everything that mattered to her, I finally understood that I'd become background noise in my own relationship. Instead of arguing or trying to change her mind, I quietly packed my essentials while she finished getting ready, gathering clothes, my laptop, important documents, and the engineering textbooks I'd been using to prepare for my professional certification exam into 2 duffel bags. The sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she headed for the door felt like punctuation on a sentence that had already been written. I drove straight to my brother's house across town, leaving only a brief note on the kitchen counter explaining that I was taking her advice and that she'd get exactly what she'd been asking for all along. The relief I felt pulling out of that driveway told me everything I needed to know about how long I'd been unhappy without admitting it to myself. The next morning, I discovered I'd grabbed Rachel's phone by mistake during my hasty departure, and she had my device with all her secrets still logged in. The phone swap mix-up happened because we both had identical black cases, but what I found while trying to contact her changed everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Her dating apps were still open, displaying months of conversations with various men that painted a picture of systematic deception I'd never imagined possible. The messages revealed detailed plans to meet someone named Josh at a CrossFit gym in Nashville the following weekend, complete with her excitement about his rock climbing adventures and spontaneous camping trips that made my engineering projects sound boring by comparison. She'd been complaining to these strangers about feeling stuck with someone who prioritized traffic lights over living life, describing me as financially stable but emotionally unavailable in ways that made me sound like a roommate who happened to pay half the bills. The conversations showed months of careful planning as she explored other options while keeping me as security, using our shared credit card to buy expensive workout clothes and supplements for what she called her fitness transformation but was clearly preparation for meeting men who valued different things than I did. Reading through her Tinder messages felt like discovering an alternate universe where Rachel was single and available, posting gym selfies and hiking photos that suggested an active lifestyle I'd never witnessed during our 3 years together. She'd created an elaborate fictional version of herself for these dating apps, claiming to be passionate about outdoor adventures and fitness challenges while the Rachel I knew spent most weekends nursing hangovers and complaining about having to walk more than 2 blocks. The most devastating discovery came when I found evidence of 2 girls' weekends that had actually been solo trips to meet men she'd connected with online, complete with hotel confirmations and restaurant reservations that our credit card statements would later confirm I'd unknowingly funded. She'd been systematically lying about Ashley needing emotional support during her divorce when she was actually driving to Atlanta and Birmingham for romantic encounters with men who thought she was unattached and adventurous. The credit card charges told the whole story: expensive dinners at romantic restaurants, hotel rooms booked for single occupancy, outdoor gear purchases that made sense now that I knew she was trying to impress rock climbers and hiking enthusiasts rather than actually developing personal interests. The contrast between her online persona as a free-spirited fitness enthusiast and the woman I'd been dating who spent weekends sleeping off hangovers was jarring enough, but realizing she'd been using my income to fund her deception felt like a betrayal that went beyond simple cheating. Her messages revealed complaints about my predictable schedule and preference for quiet weekends, describing our relationship as comfortable but lacking passion in ways that suggested she'd been 1 foot out the door for months while I worked overtime believing we were building something together. The planning involved was what hurt most. She hadn't stumbled into these connections accidentally but had been deliberately cultivating options while presenting our relationship as solid to friends and family who had no idea she was already mentally checked out and shopping for upgrades. Through Rachel's best friend Ashley, I learned this was Rachel's established pattern from college. She would secure one stable relationship while actively shopping for upgrades, then create drama to justify leaving once she found someone more exciting. Ashley finally came clean about the girls' weekends during an awkward coffee meeting where she apologized for enabling Rachel's deception, explaining that Rachel had been using the same strategy since sophomore year when she'd left her study group leader boyfriend for a fraternity president, then dumped him for a graduate student with better career prospects. The revelation that Rachel had a documented history of relationship cycling made me realize I'd been naive to think our 3 years together represented genuine commitment rather than temporary convenience while she evaluated better options. Meanwhile, I began spending time with Megan, a renewable energy project manager I'd met through work collaboration on sustainable city planning initiatives that combined traffic flow optimization with electric vehicle charging infrastructure throughout Memphis's downtown corridor. Our professional discussions about smart grid integration evolved into genuine friendship as we discovered shared interests that went beyond work, including urban gardening and volunteering at the local animal shelter where we'd both been donating time without knowing the other was involved in the same weekend programs. The contrast between relationships built on manufactured excitement versus genuine compatibility became increasingly obvious as Megan and I spent Saturday mornings working in the community garden plot I'd started after moving to my brother's neighborhood, planting vegetables that would supply the food bank while discussing sustainable transportation policies. Unlike Rachel's constant need for external validation through social media posts and nightlife adventures that required expensive outfits and bar tabs, Megan found satisfaction in meaningful work and quiet weekend projects that actually improved our community, whether we were installing pollinator gardens near bus stops or teaching neighborhood kids about composting techniques that reduced household waste. She genuinely got excited when I explained how my intersection redesign could reduce carbon emissions by 15% during peak traffic hours, asking intelligent questions about signal timing algorithms and pedestrian safety measures that showed she understood both the technical challenges and the broader environmental impact of efficient urban planning. Our conversations felt like actual exchanges rather than monologues where one person waited for their turn to talk about themselves, and Megan's enthusiasm for sustainable urban development made me realize how long I'd been apologizing for caring about work that actually mattered to people's daily lives. When she suggested we volunteer together for the city's Earth Day cleanup initiative, coordinating our schedules felt natural rather than like negotiating with someone who saw civic engagement as boring obligation that interfered with more important social activities like club photography and cocktail sampling. The difference was striking. Rachel had made me feel guilty for working overtime on projects that could save lives, while Megan appreciated the dedication required to solve complex infrastructure problems and saw my engineering background as valuable expertise rather than evidence of limited imagination or inadequate social skills. Rachel's weekend adventure with Josh imploded when she discovered he was married with 2 young children, using fitness apps to meet women while his wife worked double shifts as a pediatric nurse to support their family. The revelation came through a mutual CrossFit acquaintance who recognized Rachel from her Instagram posts and felt obligated to expose Josh's systematic deception before she got in too deep with someone who had no intention of leaving his family for random hookups he met through dating apps designed for single people seeking genuine connections. Josh had been letting Rachel fund their expensive restaurant dates and outdoor gear purchases while presenting her to his gym buddies as some desperate chick from Memphis who pays for everything, apparently finding it amusing that she believed his stories about being a successful independent contractor when he was actually unemployed and using his wife's nursing income to maintain the appearance of financial stability that attracted women seeking upgrades from their current situations. Her social media posts about authentic mountain adventures and finding someone who matches my energy became humiliating evidence of how completely she'd misjudged the situation, especially when Josh's gym friends started commenting with inside jokes about married men who let other women buy them climbing equipment they'd never actually used for legitimate outdoor activities beyond impressing naive women who confused expensive gear with actual expertise. The contrast between her elaborate romantic fantasy and the reality of being used for free meals and gear by a married father who laughed about her gullibility behind her back must have been devastating for someone who prided herself on being sophisticated about relationships and men's motivations, particularly since she'd spent months criticizing my predictability while falling for someone whose only unpredictable quality was his creativity in maintaining multiple deceptions simultaneously. When Josh's wife confronted Rachel at the CrossFit gym with photos of their family vacation to Gatlinburg and threatened to post screenshots of Rachel's texts on social media unless she stayed away from her husband permanently, Rachel found herself alone in Nashville with maxed-out credit cards and no way to salvage her romantic fantasy or her dignity in front of the fitness community she'd been trying so hard to impress. The woman who'd criticized me for being too predictable discovered that unpredictable men were often unreliable in ways that left her emotionally and financially devastated, especially when their unpredictability included wives and children they'd forgotten to mention during months of expensive courtship funded entirely by women they were manipulating for entertainment and financial gain. Rachel's credit card statements from that weekend showed charges for a luxury hotel room she'd booked expecting a romantic getaway that turned into solo accommodations after Josh's wife made her surprise appearance, expensive dinners where she'd apparently eaten alone after Josh failed to show up for their planned celebration, and outdoor gear purchases from a sporting goods store that suggested she'd been desperately trying to salvage the situation by buying him more gifts even after learning about his family circumstances. The humiliation of driving back to Memphis alone with evidence of her own desperation scattered across social media platforms where she'd been documenting what she thought was her upgrade from boring Dylan to exciting Josh must have been particularly brutal for someone who curated her online presence as carefully as she planned her relationship transitions, especially knowing that mutual friends would be able to piece together the timeline of her deception and downfall. Her final Instagram post from Nashville was a cryptic quote about trusting your instincts and knowing your worth that fooled nobody who'd been following her adventure documentation, especially since she'd deleted most of the Josh-related content by the time she crossed back into Tennessee with a completely different perspective on reliable versus exciting men and the actual cost of prioritizing thrills over genuine compatibility. Returning to Memphis to find Dylan had moved in with Megan and changed his phone number, Rachel launched a vindictive campaign involving fake Yelp reviews of the engineering firm and anonymous complaints to the city about Dylan's traffic projects that she claimed were causing unnecessary congestion and wasting taxpayer money on solutions that didn't address real problems affecting daily commuters. Her revenge strategy escalated to spreading rumors through her medical billing network that Megan was unprofessionally pursuing married colleagues and had manipulated Dylan during his vulnerable relationship transition, painting herself as the victim of workplace predators who specialized in targeting men recovering from long-term relationships while their ex-girlfriends were exploring personal growth opportunities. The harassment campaign included creating fake social media profiles to leave negative comments on the renewable energy company's posts about sustainable infrastructure projects, suggesting their collaboration with traffic engineering was a conflict of interest that prioritized personal relationships over environmental effectiveness and community safety concerns. Rachel's desperation became increasingly obvious as she expanded her attacks to include Dylan's coworkers, leaving anonymous voicemails at the municipal offices claiming his intersection redesign was based on flawed data that would increase accident rates rather than improve safety outcomes for emergency vehicles and pedestrians navigating the medical district during peak traffic hours. The irony of someone who'd spent 3 years dismissing my work suddenly becoming an expert on traffic engineering and environmental policy wasn't lost on anyone who knew about our relationship history, especially when her complaints demonstrated complete ignorance about how infrastructure development actually worked and the months of data analysis required for municipal approval. Her campaign reached its peak when she showed up at our favorite coffee shop with a dramatic scene involving throwing Dylan's belongings from a garbage bag while screaming about betrayal and how real love should have waited for her to finish exploring her options before moving on to someone who appreciated predictability over passion and authentic connection. The incident was recorded by multiple customers and went viral on TikTok within hours, creating a perfect contrast between her earlier social media posts about living authentically and her desperate meltdown over losing her backup plan when her primary strategy failed catastrophically in Nashville with married Josh. Restaurant security had to escort her out while she ranted about people not understanding that she'd needed space to grow before committing permanently, apparently believing that exploring other relationships while maintaining financial security through me represented personal development rather than calculated deception designed to maximize her options while minimizing risk. The video captured her throwing my engineering textbooks across the coffee shop while demanding to know why I couldn't wait for her to figure out what she wanted, completely missing the irony that she'd been the one who told me to leave if I didn't like our arrangement and had been actively planning to replace me for months. Her performance included tearful accusations that I'd abandoned her during her most vulnerable moment without considering that her vulnerable moment had been caused by her own choices to pursue married men who used her for entertainment and free meals while she criticized my stability as boring predictability. The contrast between her public breakdown and Megan's quiet professionalism became the defining image of the entire situation, especially when Megan calmly helped clean up the scattered belongings while Rachel continued screaming about genuine connections and authentic relationships that apparently required multiple backup options and extensive comparison shopping before making any commitments. 10 months later, at their mutual friend Kevin's wedding reception at a downtown hotel, Rachel made a final reconciliation attempt that became legendary among their entire social circle for its combination of desperation and complete misreading of the situation that had evolved during her absence. She had clearly researched Dylan's relationship with Megan through social media stalking and prepared an elaborate speech about how her Nashville experience had taught her to value stability over excitement, reframing months of systematic deception as necessary personal growth that had ultimately confirmed what she'd suspected all along about Dylan's worthiness as a long-term partner who deserved better treatment than she'd initially provided. Rachel claimed her dating exploration had been necessary research to confirm Dylan was the one before accepting what she'd suspected was an upcoming proposal, reframing her betrayal as relationship validation rather than cheating and presenting her return as the natural conclusion to an experiment that had proven his superiority over other available options in the Memphis dating market. She approached Dylan during the reception dinner, wearing the type of conservative dress she knew he'd always preferred instead of her usual attention-grabbing club outfits, delivering a tearful performance about personal growth and learning to appreciate genuine partnership over superficial thrills that might have been convincing if delivered to someone who hadn't witnessed her entire dramatic arc and subsequent meltdown. Her speech about realizing Dylan represented authentic love fell flat when delivered to someone who'd found actual happiness with someone who shared his values from the beginning, especially since Megan was sitting right there wearing the engagement ring Dylan had given her 3 months earlier during a quiet moment at their shared urban garden plot while discussing plans for expanding their community sustainability initiatives. The audacity of Rachel's timing was remarkable, interrupting Kevin's wedding reception to deliver a monologue about second chances and mature love while Dylan was clearly attending as Megan's committed partner, apparently believing that her declaration of newfound wisdom would override the reality of his moved-on life and established relationship with someone who'd never needed to shop around for upgrades or validation through comparison dating. She'd obviously planned this moment for maximum emotional impact, choosing a public setting where Dylan would feel pressured to be polite while she delivered her rehearsed explanation about how dating other men had been necessary market research that confirmed his value as marriage material, completely missing that her research had been conducted at his emotional and financial expense. The entire performance demonstrated Rachel's fundamental misunderstanding of how relationships actually worked, treating love like a commodity that could be returned and exchanged rather than a connection that required mutual respect and genuine commitment from the beginning, along with basic consideration for the other person's feelings and financial resources. Her speech included references to missing their quiet weekends and his thoughtful planning style, conveniently forgetting that she'd spent 3 years criticizing those exact qualities as evidence of his limited imagination and social inadequacy before discovering that exciting men often came with complications like wives and children they forgot to mention during expensive courtship phases. Dylan's devastating public response, suggesting Rachel should call Josh since that's where her heart had decided to go, ended her delusions permanently in front of friends who remembered her months of complaints about suburban mediocrity and predictable boyfriends who prioritized traffic engineering over spontaneous adventure that supposedly represented authentic living. The comment landed with surgical precision because everyone at Kevin's wedding had followed Rachel's social media documentation of her Nashville adventure and subsequent meltdown, making Dylan's suggestion both factually accurate and socially humiliating for someone who'd built her identity around being sophisticated about relationships and men's motivations while demonstrating remarkable naivety about married men who used dating apps for entertainment. Rachel lost her medical billing position due to workplace disruptions involving personal phone calls during patient processing and inappropriate social media usage that violated HIPAA confidentiality standards, particularly after she'd started using work computers to research Dylan's engineering projects and Megan's renewable energy company for her revenge campaign that interfered with actual medical office responsibilities. The termination came after coworkers complained about her constant personal drama affecting the medical office's professional atmosphere, especially when she'd begun crying during patient check-in procedures while explaining her relationship situation to anyone who would listen, including elderly patients who'd come for routine appointments and didn't need relationship advice from their billing coordinator who was clearly having personal problems. She eventually moved back to her parents' small town in rural Arkansas, abandoning her urban party lifestyle for helping manage their family hardware store and livestock feed business, a complete reversal from the sophisticated city life she'd curated so carefully through social media posts and expensive lifestyle choices funded by Dylan's engineering salary and credit card access. The transition from Memphis medical billing professional to small-town hardware store employee represented everything Rachel had been trying to escape since college, proving that her upgrade strategy had backfired spectacularly and left her worse off than when she'd started her relationship shopping expedition with delusions about finding someone more exciting than her stable, reliable boyfriend. Dylan and Megan got engaged during a quiet weekend at their shared urban garden plot, choosing a simple ceremony that reflected their values about community building and environmental sustainability rather than the elaborate social media spectacle Rachel would have demanded to prove their relationship's worth to outside observers who measured love through expense and public displays. They launched a joint consulting practice combining traffic engineering with renewable energy infrastructure, proving that relationships built on shared goals and mutual respect created lasting satisfaction, unlike the artificial drama Rachel had mistaken for authentic passion and genuine connection that required constant validation through external sources. Their wedding took place at the community center where they'd met volunteering for the Earth Day cleanup, with guests contributing to local environmental causes instead of giving traditional gifts that would gather dust in storage units, emphasizing their commitment to meaningful impact over material accumulation that impressed strangers on social media platforms. The contrast between their practical, community-focused celebration and Rachel's fantasy wedding plans that had included destination locations and designer dress requirements demonstrated the fundamental difference between relationships built on substance versus those based on external validation and social status markers that required constant financial investment to maintain appearances. Megan never asked Dylan to choose between his engineering career and their relationship, never criticized his dedication to municipal infrastructure projects, and never made him feel guilty for caring about work that actually improved people's daily lives rather than pursuing more glamorous but less meaningful career options that looked better on dating profiles. Their consulting practice became successful enough within 2 years to hire additional staff, allowing them to expand their sustainable transportation initiatives throughout Tennessee while building the kind of stable, purposeful life Rachel had rejected in favor of pursuing excitement that turned out to be expensive disappointment delivered by men who specialized in manipulating women seeking upgrades from their current situations.